Rome in the mid-1st century was a colossal engine of wealth, conquest, and military dominance spanning 3 continents. In October of 54, Anno Domini, governance of this global superpower was handed to a 16-year-old boy. He was not a battle-hardened general. He was not a seasoned statesman. He was a child propped up by his ruthless, calculating mother, Agrippina the Younger, a woman who had schemed, seduced, and reportedly poisoned her way to the highest halls of Roman power. At first, the young ruler performed his role with remarkable grace, lowering taxes, offering clemency to rivals, and swearing to govern by the principles of Augustus. But beneath this promising surface lay a fatal flaw. Nero did not hunger for military glory or administrative legacy. What he craved above everything else was applause, desperate validation as a singer, poet, chariot racer, and performer. That hunger turned lethal. To understand Nero, one must first understand the woman who engineered him. Agrippina the Younger was one of the most terrifyingly effective political operators in ancient history. On December 15th, 37 Anno Domini, she gave birth to a boy named Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus in the coastal town of Antium. Ancient biographers recorded that the rising sun scorched the newborn before he drew his first breath, an omen interpreted as prophecy of a fiery, destructive life. Cruelty was hardwired into his bloodline. His father was notorious throughout Rome for extreme brutality and murder of political opponents. His mother was the granddaughter of Augustus and sister of the infamous Emperor Caligula. When Lucius was barely 3 years old, Caligula banished Agrippina and seized the boy's entire inheritance, teaching him a brutal early lesson. Security is an illusion, and everything can be ripped away in a single morning. Everything changed in 41 Anno Domini when the Praetorian Guard assassinated Caligula and dragged his uncle Claudius onto the imperial throne. Agrippina returned from exile with a singular, obsessive goal: placing her son on the throne of Rome. Her political maneuvering was breathtaking in its precision. In 49 Anno Domini, she seduced and married her own uncle, Emperor Claudius, securing special Senate dispensation to legitimize the union. By 50 Anno Domini, she convinced the aging emperor to formally adopt her son, renaming him Nero Claudius Caesar. She then systematically positioned the 14-year-old Nero ahead of Claudius's biological son Britannicus in the line of succession, stripping Britannicus of every ally and tutor. By October 54 Anno Domini, Claudius had outlived his usefulness. He collapsed after eating prized mushrooms at a feast. While he lay dying, Agrippina locked the palace doors, secured the Praetorian Guard's loyalty, and presented Nero to the legions. The early period of Nero's reign, from 54 to 59 Anno Domini, is remembered by historians as the Quinquennium Neronis, meaning the 5 golden years of Nero. To the Senate's genuine surprise, the teenage emperor's administration proved remarkably stable, humane, and prosperous. This success belonged largely to the extraordinary council guiding him: Agrippina managing hard political power, the brilliant Stoic philosopher Seneca the Younger crafting imperial speeches, and Praetorian prefect Sextus Afranius Burrus ensuring military loyalty. Nero enacted sweeping civic reforms that improved everyday Roman life. He abolished secretive treason trials, cut provincial taxes, passed legislation allowing slaves to bring legal complaints against abusive masters, and strictly limited public executions. When forced to sign his very first death warrant, Nero reportedly wept, crying, "How I wish I had never learned to write." The treasury overflowed, provinces remained peaceful, and the common people genuinely adored their young, accessible ruler. As Nero reached his 20s, the arrangement that had brought him power began suffocating him. Agrippina refused to surrender control. She sat beside him during diplomatic receptions, interfered in his romantic affairs, and demanded total veto power over imperial decisions. When Nero fell in love with Poppaea Sabina and moved to divorce his aristocratic wife Octavia, Agrippina threatened to throw her political weight behind Britannicus. Shortly afterward, Britannicus died mysteriously at an imperial banquet after drinking a cup of wine. By 59, Anno Domini, Nero decided his mother had to die. Because Agrippina routinely ingested antidotes against poison, Nero devised a mechanical trap, a luxury vessel engineered to collapse at sea, drowning its passengers while appearing as a tragic accident. He invited her to a reconciliation feast, walked her personally to the waiting ship, and sprung the trap mid-voyage. Agrippina survived, swimming to shore in darkness, and sent Nero a message confirming her survival. Hearing that his mother had survived, Nero panicked completely. Abandoning all pretense of an accident, he dispatched his former tutor Anicetus and a team of armed guards directly to Agrippina's seaside villa. When the killers burst into her bedroom, Agrippina understood immediately that her own son had ordered the assassination. As the assassins drew their swords, she tore open her robes, pointed to her abdomen, and shouted her famous final words, "Strike me in the womb that bore him." The guards stabbed her to death. The Senate, cowering in fear, sent Nero congratulatory messages, claiming Agrippina had been caught plotting against him and taken her own life. Yet the taboo of matricide, the ultimate crime in Roman culture, shattered Nero's psyche permanently. Historians record that for the remainder of his life, Nero was haunted by nightmares, claiming his mother's ghost, and the Furies pursued him relentlessly through the darkness, bearing whips and burning torches. With Agrippina dead, Seneca retired, and Burrus dying in 62 Anno Domini, Nero stripped away every traditional imperial restraint. He no longer cared about governing an empire. He wanted to perform. In ancient Rome, public performance on stage was considered deeply degrading, an occupation reserved for slaves, prostitutes, and social outcasts. For a Roman emperor, a direct descendant of Augustus, to step onto a public stage represented an unspeakable dishonor to the Roman state. Nero did not care in the slightest. He subjected himself to demanding physical training regimes, sleeping with heavy lead plates resting on his chest to expand lung capacity, undergoing strict purging diets, and spending endless hours practicing the cithara, a professional lyre. He performed in tragic plays, often playing roles of pregnant women, blinded heroes, and matricides. In 64 Anno Domini, he made his public debut in Naples, then performed before massive Roman audiences, establishing the Neronia, a quinquennial festival of music, poetry, and athletics modelled on the Greek Olympics. Nero's performances were not optional for Rome's elite. Senators and soldiers were required to sit through multi-hour recitals in heated, locked theatres. Biographers recorded that women gave birth in the stands during his performances, and desperate men feigned death to be carried out on stretchers as the only acceptable means of escape. To guarantee overwhelming applause, Nero created the Augustiani, an organized corps of over 5,000 young men functioning as a professional cheering squad. They accompanied him everywhere, chanting rhythmic praise whenever he struck a high note on his lyre. The senatorial elite were horrified, viewing every performance as a degradation of Rome's dignity. The lower classes, however, were thrilled, loving the free entertainment, generous cash handouts, and the novelty of an accessible ruler. This fundamental divide between Rome's powerful elite and its common population would eventually prove catastrophic for Nero's political survival and the stability of the entire empire. In the early morning hours of July 19th, 64 Anno Domini, a catastrophic fire erupted in the wooden merchant stalls surrounding the Circus Maximus. Fueled by high summer winds and densely packed flammable goods, the fire raged uncontrollably through Rome's narrow streets for 6 days and 7 nights before reigniting and burning for 3 more. 4 of Rome's 14 districts remained intact, 7 were severely gutted, and 3 were completely obliterated. The famous legend that Nero stood on a tower playing violin while watching his city burn is a pure invention of later centuries. The violin would not even be invented for another 1,000 years. Historical records by the historian Tacitus present a far more complex picture. Nero was actually at his birthplace of Antium, approximately 35 miles away, when the fire broke out. Upon returning to Rome, he opened his private palaces and public gardens to shelter hundreds of thousands of homeless refugees and organized emergency grain shipments to prevent mass starvation. Despite genuine relief efforts, rumors spread faster than the flames themselves. Citizens noticed the fire had reignited on property owned by Nero's allies, and that vast stretches of prime central real estate had been conveniently cleared. Facing catastrophic public backlash and accusations of deliberate arson, Nero needed a scapegoat to absorb the population's rage. He found one in an obscure religious sect growing in Rome's slums, the Christians. The historian Tacitus, though expressing personal contempt for Christianity, recorded the extreme cruelty of what followed. Nero had Christians torn apart by wild dogs, crucified in public arenas, and covered in pitch and burned alive as human torches to illuminate his private imperial gardens at night. He rode among the crowds in a chariot dressed as a performer. It was during this Neronian persecution that tradition holds the apostles Peter, crucified upside down, and Paul, beheaded, met their deaths in Rome. With large portions of central Rome cleared by fire, Nero constructed his ultimate dream project, the Domus Aurea, meaning the Golden House. This was not merely a palace, it was an artificial landscape built across the heart of Rome, spanning over 300 acres across 3 hills, featuring artificial lakes, lush gardens, and architectural marvels that stunned even Rome's most seasoned engineers. At its entrance stood the Colossus, a 120-foot-tall bronze statue depicting Nero as the sun god. Inside, an octagonal dining room featured a rotating dome driven by hydraulic power that mimicked the movement of the stars overhead, while hidden pipes showered dining guests continuously with fresh flowers and perfumes. When the sprawling complex was finally completed, Nero reportedly walked through its gilded halls and remarked, "At last, I can begin to live like a human being." To fund this architectural fantasy, he debased the Roman currency, seized aristocratic properties, and looted temples across Greece and Asia Minor. By 68 Anno Domini, Nero had backed himself into an inescapable corner. He retained affection among parts of the urban lower class, but he was despised by every group that actually held power: the Senate, wealthy elites, provincial governors, and ultimately the military itself. In early 68 Anno Domini, Gaius Julius Vindex, governor of Gallia Lugdunensis, declared open rebellion against Nero's crushing tax demands. Although Vindex was defeated militarily, the uprising proved Nero's government was dangerously vulnerable. Servius Sulpicius Galba, a respected governor in Hispania, then declared his opposition, bringing veteran legions and deep political credibility. The final blow came when Praetorian prefect Nymphidius Sabinus bribed the Praetorian Guard to abandon the emperor entirely. Overnight, Nero transformed from absolute ruler of the Mediterranean world into an isolated fugitive. Waking on the night of June 8, 68 Anno Domini, he found his imperial bodyguards had deserted their posts and ran through empty palace halls, calling for friends who never answered. Fleeing the palace in disguise with 4 loyal freedmen, Nero rode to a suburban villa owned by his freedman Phaon, 4 miles outside the city gates. A messenger arrived with devastating news. The Senate had formally declared Nero a public enemy, and condemned him to be executed in the ancient traditional manner, stripped naked, his neck locked in a wooden fork, and beaten to death with rods. Terrified of public humiliation, Nero ordered a grave dug immediately on the spot. He wept continuously, repeating the same words over and over, "What an artist dies in me." Hearing the hoofbeats of approaching cavalry, Nero realized his final moment had arrived. Unable to summon the courage to act alone, he begged his secretary Epaphroditus to assist him. As cavalry burst through the door, Nero plunged a blade into his own throat. As he lay dying, an officer pressed a cloak against the wound. Nero looked up and whispered his final words. "Too late. This is fidelity." He died at 30 years old, ending the Julio-Claudian dynasty forever. Nero's death plunged Rome into immediate catastrophic civil war. In a single year spanning 68 to 69 Anno Domini, 4 different generals, Galba, Otho, Vitellius and Vespasian, each claimed the imperial throne in rapid, bloody succession. The victorious Flavian dynasty made every effort to erase Nero's memory entirely. They filled in the underground chambers of the Domus Aurea, drained its massive artificial lake, and constructed a giant public amphitheatre directly on top of it, the Flavian Amphitheatre, known today as the Colosseum, named after the giant Colossus statue of Nero that once stood beside it. Among Christians, the trauma of Nero's persecution echoed across centuries. Many scholars argue that the famous number of the beast, 666, found in the Book of Revelation, is a numerical code in the ancient practice of gematria for the Greek title Neron Caesar, meaning Nero Caesar, translated into Hebrew characters. The boy who inherited the world died as history's most infamous monster. The story of Emperor Nero is not merely a tale of ancient cruelty or royal decadence. It stands as an enduring cautionary tale about the psychology of unchecked power. Nero was a teenager thrust onto the throne of the ancient world, blessed with immense talent, extraordinary wealth, brilliant advisors, and a peaceful empire. He possessed every ingredient necessary to become one of history's genuinely great rulers. Yet his desperate need for personal applause, his inability to balance ego with responsibility, and his fundamental refusal to accept the burdens of leadership transformed remarkable potential into monstrous reality. He preferred the applause of a theatre to the stability of a civilization. Power, in the end, acts as a mirror. It amplifies whatever already exists inside the person who holds it. In Nero, power revealed a man who could command armies, reshape cities, and rule continents, but who ultimately died as nothing more than a frightened actor desperately begging an indifferent world for one final fleeting round of applause.